Welcome to an overview of Cybersecurity and Risk 101.
Thursday, 10:24 a.m., and our client's critical website goes down. We call the data center. The phone doesn't ring. 10 minutes later, we're finally able to call the place that houses our client's website. Yet our client's website is still no longer up. When we get someone on the line, we ask, what's going on? We just saw our client's website go down and your phones weren't working. At which point we're informed that this data center, which is a football field sized building that houses servers for thousands of companies, experienced an attack called distributed denial of service attack. It's equivalent to having a retail store being surrounded by millions of cars, preventing anyone from being able to do commerce. Now we ask, it looks like you're back up, so why is our equipment not back on? We told them where our equipment was located, and they said, well, it looks like your client was the target of the attack. A few minutes afterwards, our client receives an email and calls us to tell us about it. And it says, we're DD4BC, we're a criminal organization. Here's a couple of articles that you can reference to see that we actually are who we say we are, and here's the targets that we've had in the past. We wanted to show you what we're capable of, and we took down the data center that you're in for a couple of minutes to show you that we're serious. What we're asking is that you send us $6,000 worth of Bitcoins, and we'll give you 24 hours to get it to us. Now, we understand you probably haven't transacted in Bitcoins before, so here's a couple of helpful links that you can click on in order to, with your credit card, get Bitcoins. If you should choose to not want to pay us and contact the authorities, here's a couple of helpful links to the FBI and some other organizations. You can try calling them. They can't help you. Again, you have 24 hours. If you don't pay us within that time, we'll again take down your website, and every hour after that, we're going to double that fee from $6,000 to $12,000, which sounded like a pretty reasonable request. Pretty nice level of customer service to get the links provided to us so we know what to do. So we tell our client, it looks like at this point we have about 20 hours left. Our recommendation is probably you should pay this. We haven't seen a level of attack like this before. You're an organization with just 20 employees. Typically, we've only heard of these level of attacks for much larger organizations. In parallel to you making this payment, we're going to look to see if there's any potential solutions out there. And our client said, okay. Now, a few months back, I remembered there was a friend of mine in California that had a larger client experience an attack. So I gave him a call, and he gave me a phone number of a vendor that might be able to help. That vendor was Cloudflare. We gave them a call, and I said, one of our clients is currently experiencing an attack, and we're wondering if you could help. The first phrase out of their mouth was it Cloudflare, or was it DD4BC? To which we were a little surprised. How did they know it was DD4BC? I said, well, they've been attacking a lot of people lately, so we can absolutely prevent the DD4BC attacks. I was pretty excited. I asked, well, great. How do we do this? How much is it? To which they replied, it's $5,000 a month. Knowing that $5,000 a month is probably going to be less palatable than paying $6,000 one time, I asked, well, is there any other options? Do you have any lower cost options? I mean, this is a 20-person company. They're not going to be able to easily afford paying $5,000 a month. I said, sure. For our partners that are experienced with deploying our solution, we have a $200 a month option. I said, great. I hung up the phone. I called the president of our client, and I said, we got a potential solution. Got good news and bad news. I know we have 18 hours left, but it looks like we'll be able to hopefully implement in time. I said, well, what's the news? I said, well, would you be okay paying $5,000 a month in order to get this protection? I knew the answer. He started saying less than colorful words, and I said, well, hold on. There's another option, though. It's really intended for the expert users of Cloudflare. It's $200 a month. And our client said, well, fine. Let's go with that one. So, okay, well, we can go with that one. We've never implemented it before. And again, we're not experts at it. We're going to need some time. So have you been able to pay that $6,000 ransom to at least buy us time and prevent them or someone else from coming back in a few weeks? Our client said, we trust you, so we're not going to pay. You have 18 hours left to go ahead and implement. And I said, well, it's great that you trust us. Thank you, but we don't trust us yet. We haven't built this and done this before, so it's going to be a gamble to see if we can get it done in 18 hours. Again, in reply, we trust you. Go ahead. The next 18 hours were some of the most stressful 18 hours in my life. We got a number of folks at Excel.net. I think we had 3 or 4 of us staying up all night. We also had 3 or 4 at the client site to be able to do testing, and we had to do a significant project to be ready for their e-commerce based website to be operable by 7 a.m. It was shortly after 6:20 a.m. in the morning that we think we got everything working. At which point we held our breath, knowing we had about 3 hours to see if the hackers are going to come back. 10:24 on Friday rolled around, nothing happened. But shortly after that, our client called us again saying, hey, we got another email from DD4BC. They said, looks like you chose to ignore us. We're going to give you another 24 hours. So we assumed that Cloudflare blocked them, waited another day. We've never heard from them again, so it looks like Cloudflare was able to help in this instance. So a couple lessons learned. First, gather lessons like this. Okay, so when things like this happen, you got to gather these lessons and apply them regularly. This one in particular was Cloudflare's solution, which is really similar to a PO box with your mail. The reason why people get PO box is to typically protect their actual address. Cloudflare works the same way. So instead of the rest of the world knowing exactly where your website's located, it goes through Cloudflare and it cleans the good traffic and then gets it to your site. Now, you're probably going to be surprised, but if you ever experience an attack by a hacker and you're in the middle of it, don't turn off your computer. Turning off the computer is basically like destroying evidence, as this is what helps the authorities figure out live what's going on. And if you do turn off the computer, it can help actually the hacker get away. Now, what you can do is just unplug the physical access to the internet, so at least the further compromise is stopped. Now, I mentioned Bitcoin. If you're not familiar with it, it's a currency that was born in 2008. It's created by really complicated mathematical algorithms. Back then, and this was years ago, each Bitcoin was valued at $240. As of the date of this recording, a Bitcoin is valued at almost $57,000. Now, does this all matter to you? Well, 2/3 of the organizations that have under 500 employees were breached in 2020. And it's expected that the cyber criminal industry will be a $10 trillion industry by 2025.
Thanks, Adam. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of our clients, and one of the major topics we discuss is security. And one of the common things I ask them is, what is the worst time for a breach, an outage, or anything to happen? And unfortunately for this story, it did happen at the worst possible time. So it all started 4 months before the actual outage event, where one of the employees from the accounting team was at either Starbucks or they traveled frequently, so airport, connected his old mobile phone to public Wi-Fi. And somehow, some way, his mobile device got infected. Now, a lot of the times it depends on who's trying to attack you. They could have tried to just steal his personal information. They could have tried to wipe his phone. These hackers in particular decided to dig deeper. So instead of making it known that they had compromised his phone, they dug deeper. And they were able to get access to his corporate mailbox that was configured on his personal phone. From there, they just spent some time looking through his emails, figuring out who he worked for, what he did, who he interacted with. And over time, they were able to get a basic idea of the reporting structure of the company. They then researched the company, figured out what the potential value was and what their best option was to exploit it and make the most money they could. And what they decided to do was to compromise through targeted spear phishing, creating custom tailored emails to trick specific employees of this company who had access to their banking system, accounts payable, and ultimately they determined that they do a lot of business with this one vendor, and they do it between December and January every year. So they waited even longer and created a completely separate domain owned and run by them that had one letter difference than the domain name of their largest vendor. They then created mailboxes with the exact names of the contacts at that vendor who our client interacts with on a regular basis. They determined who at our client interacts with this vendor. They compromised their mailboxes. And ultimately, they were able to completely hijack all communications with the vendor during the busiest time of the year from an invoicing standpoint. So they knew the PO number, they knew the dollar amount, and they knew when to launch their attack. So when they decided to hit go, they used one of our clients' legitimate PO numbers, sent the correct form in the correct format to the right person at the client and said, hey, we're changing our banking information. Here's our new ACH info. Now, our client had accounting practices in place where they should have called the vendor. They should have asked, hey, how do you like your bank? What's going on? Is this legitimate? Unfortunately, they broke their process. They changed the banking information, and they made a payment for $450,000. Now, luckily, the accounting person realized shortly thereafter that there could have been something wrong with this and that she forgot to follow one step. So luckily they were able to stop the payment. The hackers only got away with about $20,000 of that $450,000, but ultimately it was a well-coordinated attack that went over a period of 4 months. Now, what can we do about this? How can we prevent something like this from happening? Well, in that initial compromise of that initial person, that mobile device, once they had obtained the credentials of the first targeted person's mailbox and they tried to log in, if they had multi-factor authentication in place, they would not have been able to get access to that mailbox again. Now, multi-factor, we're all familiar with it, whether it's through your bank. Heck, even most personal email systems now have it, where if you sign in from a different device or a different browser or you update your computer, it asks you to prove who you are. Another thing they did is they revised their accounting procedures. They had a process that would have stopped this, but they put additional controls in place for the flow of money itself. So there's additional layers before payments are remitted to make sure that any changes in any checks are being followed. The next thing they've implemented since then is deploying security training through simulated phishing campaigns to all of their staff that are done on a regular basis. The reason this helps is you may not be able to always stop that first compromise, but you can limit the spread of the breach by making sure your staff are trained and vigilant on what to look out for to prevent the attack from spreading. And the last piece is having cyber coverage in place to help speed up how quickly your breach can get mitigated. In this example, once our client realized the $450,000 payment was fraudulent, their first phone call was to their insurance agent to say, we have been breached. We need to get in touch with somebody. We need help. The cyber coverage firm they contract with companies who only do active breach mitigation. So they're familiar with the trends of what's going on. They're familiar with the attacks that are occurring in real time right now. And they were able to, within a matter of 48 hours, stop the initial spread and identify an initial response on who did it and prevent it from spreading further.
Friendly lunch. Friend of mine gave me a call and said, hey, I've got a buddy of mine wanting the three of us grab lunch. I said, sure. And a few days later, we met up for lunch and started talking, and each of us explained what we did. My friend is an insurance broker. The friend that he brought was the chief financial officer for a retail organization. And I, of course, gave my background in IT and IT security. And shortly in the conversation, the CFO says, you know, I got a kind of a funny story. We have this supplier. It's our main supplier. We've had him for, over 10 years. Having some difficulties lately. I'm like, well, what's going on? Well, I think we're having some trouble wiring them money, and they're complaining that there's something with their bank, and so we got some new bank information and sent them more money, and it's just not making it over. And I freeze in the middle of a bite of food. I put my fork down and I asked, well, have you started sending them money to somewhere differently than the past? Yeah, no. They said they were having banking trouble, so they converted to a new bank. Okay. Now, when you talked on the phone with your supplier, what did they say? Oh, well, the supplier doesn't doesn't speak English, so we've only been communicating in email. But next week, I requested, and we'll be doing a phone call with his daughter who does speak English, and then we'll be able to figure out what's going on. After saying those words, he stopped chewing his food, started maybe realizing what was going on, and I replied, "No, I really think you just got hacked, and hope you didn't send too much money." To which he replied, "Well, so far it's been $525,000. Right before he grabbed his coat and ran out, I said, "Well, at least your friend does insurance. Hopefully, you got the cyber attack insurance." And he shook his head no and said, "Well, that's kind of why I wanted to grab lunch with you to find out more," and ran off. So, lessons learned here. It's gonna be pretty similar to Nick's. In fact, they're identical. Multi-factor authentication, accounting procedures. Anytime there's a change in banks, you have to verbally validate with your supplier, vendor, whoever you're sending money to, when there's that change. Security training. I think being in the finance department, everyone there needs to get an extra level of security training and simulated attacks. The compromise they experience is a pretty similar one. And of course, cyber attack coverage, and I think Michelle is going to be covering this with us later as well. It's really the least expensive coverage that you can get. It's probably the most utilized and most claimed type of coverage right now for an organization. So let's review the main risks. There's really 3 core risks. First, lacking IT or security process. I think most assume that their IT department is also doing security. Security and IT, even though they both use computers, are completely different competencies. So we see the need to gather these lessons, and there's many ways you can gather these lessons. I'll review it in a little bit, and then apply the lessons that you gather predictably. Now, most organizations that we work with, and I think most organizations that are listening to this recording now, don't have unlimited budgets. You have a limited budget, so you have to make it count, go after the largest risks, and that's exactly what you should do. Figure out what are the biggest holes in security that you have, and go after from the biggest to the smallest. And the most compromised way that people get into organizations is through people, is through your staff. So ensure that you have regular training and assessment of that training to make sure it's working well. So let's go through the steps. Again, get cyber attack insurance. We'd recommend $2 million. If you can't do $2 million, minimum $1 million. No one can promise that 100% of your security risk can be mitigated. All you can do is reduce that security risk. So prepare for the worst case. Get it. It's inexpensive. Make sure you have off-premise backups. So in the case that somebody gets compromised, that you're able to rely on an off-premise copy of the data that you have, do an annual test, and simulate it like a hacker just attacked. Don't trust the backups and don't trust what others are saying. Make sure that you're part of a simulated fire drill of a hack. Next, follow standards-based information security policies. There's defined standards that are out there. The 2 most common, one national, is called NIST 800, and the international one is ISO 27001. When you put this together, you're going to also have an incident response plan, which is, hey, what do I do in case of an incident? A standing operating procedure for security, and one for change control. Step 2, apply those lessons. Implement 2-factor authentication. That's going to prevent majority of those phishing attacks like the one that Nick and I described. Implement advanced security training. If you want to look up an organization that can help you with that, you can either reach out to us, xl.net, or you can look up KnowBe4, the most popular security training that's out there, very affordable. To prioritize your biggest risks to lowest risks, luckily there's a not-for-profit organization that already put that prioritization together for you. It's the Center for Internet Security, CIS, and they have 20 security controls. You just go from the first to the last. You'll take care of 94% of the risk that you have. And then again, the final step in maximizing your lessons. Use IT security firms. They're actively working on helping organizations reduce their risks. Don't assume that your IT department or your IT staff is able to do that for you. They're different competencies, and you require different departments at least, or different firms with that competency, one for security and one for IT support. And next, continuously audit those lessons. At some regular interval, audit the compromises that could happen. Make sure that you're still protected against them.
Thank you, Adam and Nick. You have heard some frightening stories from these two gentlemen, and I want to start today by explaining to you what data breach coverage is in very basic terms and why do you need it, or more importantly, addressing why you think you don't need it. So who's ultimately responsible for data when it is breached? It is the data owner that is ultimately responsible, not your data host. So if you are feeling comfortable that your information is, quote, in the cloud, unquote, or it's being hosted or held someplace else, that is a start. But here's another scary story. An IT vendor who was hosting the data unsecured the information and it went out over the internet. Long story short is all of that private information that was now unsecured and out there for anyone to utilize, the business had to pay for that. They had to do the outside legal consultation, get the forensic teams to come in and figure out what had happened. They were responsible for paying all the notification services, which is, by the way, by law, establish a call center, establish credit monitoring for up to 7 years for each person that was impacted. The business was investigated by the Office of Civil Rights and Attorneys General, not the data host, not your IT vendor. And even if you end up being not guilty of doing anything, you still are going to require expenses to defend yourself. So the major causes of claims have really nothing to do with your IT vendor. They're doing their darndest to try to prevent folks from hacking into your system. But on the left side of your slide is the majority of claims that occur happen because of insider data, or I'm sorry, insider sin of commission or sin of omission, employee actions. And your IT vendor cannot control what your employees do. For example, responding to an email that has a hyperlink in it that is going to end up introducing a virus into your system. They can't control what's going on with portable media. They can't control paper documents. And by the way, data breach policies do cover hard copy paper records, or just bad behavior. The phishing schemes that Nick and Adam spoke of, they're not able to control your employees falling victim to those things. So why don't you have insurance? I'm guessing a lot of them has to do with the fact that you feel like an IT department or an IT vendor is taking care of all this. And as we just discussed, they cannot stop every attack, nor they can prevent employee errors. Small organizations, we're small, nobody wants us. Well, actually 43% of the attacks are on smaller businesses. And a lot of that is the assumption is that you do not have the proper controls in place and you become a very enticing target. Well, what about credit cards? We use a payment processor for that. Again, the liability is going to come down to who is the data owner. Reach a contract with your payroll service or your credit card processing company in the size 4 font that is in your very lengthy contract. there's going to be information in there for you that says they're not responsible. Well, we don't do any business over the internet, so we don't have any exposure. Well, every financial transaction that you have has some kind of embedded data. We don't have thousands of records as a reason. Well, you've got enough, you've got something, you've got vendor, employee information. My favorite one is our employees would never be fooled. As Adam and Nick have said, very highly placed folks within a company have made these mistakes. And we have top-notch security. There is no such thing. So I think I've probably covered just about every reason you can think of, or the main ones as to why you possibly haven't purchased insurance. So let's take a very simple view of a data breach. So what happens when a data breach occurs? Well, you find out about it. You have to figure out how it occurred, and that is going to require hiring a forensic IT company to come in and take a look at it. You're probably going to have an attorney review the legal ramifications if you are conducting business across state lines. Every state's got different requirements, and that all has to be performed by experts. The law requires you to provide notification and credit monitoring for any potentially involved individual. And then there's the public relations, particularly if you're in an organization that is relying on donors and their information might have been compromised. Longer term, lawsuits, regulatory fines and penalties, especially if it's HIPAA-related information that's gotten out there, repairing your reputation, and income loss. So if you have chosen not to purchase data breach coverage, who is going to manage and coordinate all of this for you internally? Let's go back for a second. What every organization needs to understand is you own the information. You are ultimately responsible for this. General liability policies do not cover these costs. If it's packaged within your general liability, it's very lightweight coverage and will cover maybe only notification costs. Read your IT contract regarding privacy breach events. Who's going to pay for all of this? I guarantee you it is not going to be your IT vendor, but you can protect yourself financially. One of the things I want to make sure everyone understands is that policies are not the same. All data breach policies are built very, very differently, and definitions are critical to understanding what you have. Not all of them are the same. Some of the biggest differences are the definition of a computer system. Are employee-owned computers, devices, phones, laptops, iPads, are they included? Or is it only company-owned equipment? That is critical when you are reading your policy. What is the definition of employee? In some cases, a sole owner may be excluded from coverage. Social engineering and cyber fraud, what does it include? I've underlined the words no fault in here. So you heard Nick mention that through a phishing scheme that they did not follow their own internal procedures. And some policies will say, well, if you didn't follow your own internal procedure, we're not paying for that. Wrong payment out to a phony vendor. Or some policies will be no fault. And then the last thing I'd like for you to make sure you understand is your silos of limits. Adam had mentioned the 2 million. A lot of my smaller clients carry 1 million, but there's a separate 1 million for fines and penalties, a separate 1 million for claims, and there's a separate bucket of money for notification costs and ongoing forensics. So really understand these 4 key areas when you're looking at potential policy coverage. Illinois Select Risk, my agency, we partner with carriers that have the broadest coverage and the broadest definitions. So what would you do if you were breached? If you decide that insurance is not for you, how much money have you set aside in reserves? And what vendors have you already notified so you're not panicking on whom to call should a data breach occur? What is the very first action you would take if you discovered that you had been a victim of a data breach or a phishing scheme? Those things need to be put in place in terms of your internal policies and procedures and security measures. Or if you've purchased insurance, the first action you would be to take is to call your carrier. We hope that this simple overview of cyber risk and cyber breaches has been helpful for you. If you need to follow up and want to ask any questions, please contact me, Michelle, at Illinois Select Risk regarding coverage, or Nick or Adam at xl.net. if you need a fine reference point and referral for a good IT security consultant. Thank you for your time.